Yes. Mr. Fisher.
Oh, I apologize, Mr. Chair. I didn't realize we were going live. For the record, Ted Fisher, Vermont Agency of Education. I hung out through the break just because I wasn't sure from the invitation whether the committee wanted the agency to respond to another part of this section. So I'm happy to say we have some other thoughts on the Grow Vermont or Grow Your Own grant program in section 5 as well. So I'm happy to hang out until you're ready.
Okay, why don't you just stay put for now? That would be great. I also have an email from your boss, Secretary French, on another section as well, just giving it the thumbs up. But for now, we have Mr. Fannin here, Executive Director of the NEA.
Vermont NEA, yes.
Vermont NEA. Mr. Fannin.
So
at page 716.
716. So good afternoon, Jeff Fannin, Vermont NEA. Thank you for having me on this Good Friday. Page 716, miscellaneous ed bill. We have a few comments. I think you've probably heard some of them previously, but I'll just reiterate. We think we are in agreement on section 1 on the recalculation of the Act 173 grants to use. We think there should be a delay in the rules. It's not to say we don't agree with the rules themselves. It's just sort of a 1-year delay, particularly in this pandemic moment, giving people the necessary time to get trained, understand what this is. We think that that 1-year delay is appropriate and think that it's advisable.
May I, Chair?
Yeah.
Have you polled your members? Do you have any sense of members weighing in on this?
We haven't polled our members on this issue, no. But we do. I have spoken with teachers, special educators. There's a varying degree around the state. There are some that are ready to go, and some that are not. And the ones who are not is not insignificant, the numbers. And so when we talk to people, we do. I ask them a lot about 173 and their trainings and these things. It's obviously some places are ready to go, and others are not. And the ones who are not, I'm worried that it's going to be a bit chaotic. A lot of resources being needed and people being confused and not ready to go. And I think that's not good for them. It's not good for the system. It's not good for kids.
Quick follow-up.
Yeah, please.
So I was very persuaded a lot at the beginning of this session about the fatigue out there. Could you reflect, is the fatigue dissipated? Is everybody now just back and everybody's happy? Or would you say that your members are still a little fatigued?
I think, well, Senator, I think in your household, you might know a little bit about this, but what I've heard is people are exhausted still, and they are looking for June. I've heard, very recently heard a school thinking to going to, I think it's June 27th, the last day of the year, because they had COVID days, they have things of that nature, and that is pushing people over the edge. Now, I will say that today, for example, is the last day before spring break for a lot of schools. And I know my colleague was having a conversation with a local leader today and about an issue and a policy matter, and thinking whether she could get in touch with her colleagues. And she made I think the wise choice. I'm not going to ask my colleagues about this issue today as they're heading out the door. I mean, that's to answer your question. We are still hearing fatigue significantly, and getting people engaged is difficult.
Thank you.
Senator.
At the beginning of the year, we talked about the 175 days or whatever it is, and about whether giving a blanket waiver to that. But the AOE said, well, let's wait and see what's going on, and then we could we can see how it goes based on other things. I don't know if schools like that you just mentioned having to go longer has made a request and was denied, or just felt it was better for the kids to go longer, or.
That's a great question, because you're right. We did take it up in January, and the thought was premature. And as we all know, life goes on. You're all working hard. You're trying to get through the day to day, and that kind of issue that was discussed in January is lost here in April. I will actually know exactly who I'm going to talk to and my local leader, and suggest that that's an awfully long time to go to the end of June practically. And is that something you want to ask your superintendent to seek a waiver for? I mean, there are pandemic days or snow days or some maintenance facility issue that they lost a day.
Can the superintendent do it, or is it the Secretary of Education?
I think it was, I'm trying to go back my memory back here, Senator, that the superintendent would have to ask the secretary for a waiver of the 175-day requirement. But I can go back and check that, but I'm going to suggest that they initiate that. Because that was the concern. She was hearing it from her members saying, I don't know if I can hang on.
Right. And I remember Secretary French wasn't opposed to it, but he said, let's wait and see how things
Correct.
go. And then
That school didn't happen to be the one my kids go to.
I don't think so. It wasn't, no.
Jeff, is the waiver process, that's already set up, correct? You can just go ahead and put a waiver in or no?
There is, I can't remember, I think it's in statute that a school board can seek from the State Board of Education a waiver of the 175, and the State Board of Education must take it up at its next meeting, and if it doesn't, the waiver is granted.
Okay.
So,
Mind if Mr. Fisher jumps in on this?
sure.
Ted, you want to say quickly something about this?
Absolutely. For the record, Ted Fisher, Vermont Agency of Education, just wanted to jump in and say that yes, in normal years, as Jeff just outlined, it is a state board. The state board grants waivers. This year, as has happened throughout the pandemic, that the state board has delegated that authority to the Secretary of Education. So the agency is receiving requests for calendar waivers and processing those.
Okay, so that kind of process is moving.
Right, but my bigger concern is it's a legitimate concern, the number of days, and certainly the education agency in January was saying it's premature.
Yeah.
And I'm worried it's getting lost, right? The conversation, people are just thinking, okay, I've got to go to June 27th, whatever.
Right.
And that ought to be I'm going to go back to this member and local leader and say, hey, you might want to jostle your superintendent and ask about that.
Yeah.
It's on the
Okay.
table. They
Yeah.
can ask for it.
Yeah, okay.
So
So if you could, so that's great. Appreciate that. So we're just under the wire, as you
Yep.
know, we're getting close to.
we do think that the delay of the.
So we got that,
rules.
section 3.
Section 3 in the curriculum.
Yeah,
We do have significant concerns here. I'll just be honest with you. Telling professionals what to teach in this context has come up over the many years. And our position has been, it ought to be up to the professional to decide what she or he wants to teach and how to teach it and the process for doing so.
what about the educational quality standards?
There are some,
What
there are
usually-
guidance,
Yeah.
but you're telling, in this, as I read this, and there may be a new draft, and I apologize for that, that they shall teach the Holocaust and civics, and that, what's next? These are professionals. I think if you ask most social studies teachers, they're touching on, I don't know, to the depth that it may vary, but on the Holocaust, they're teaching civics in certain ways. They're already doing a lot of this already. I don't know what problem we're trying to solve, truthfully. It's incredibly disrespectful to teachers to be told that you have to teach this or that. And what is next? What are we going to tell them not to teach? What are we going to tell them to teach? And I think it's I think they are professionals. We need to judge, let them teach what they think their students can handle and trust them to be professionals. We don't do this for lawyers, we don't do it for engineers, doctors. We don't tell them how to practice medicine or how to build a bridge. They are professionals, so too are teachers. We don't treat them that way.
Senator Schindler.
So I shared much of your concerns last year with the civics bill because it was very specific. It said something like you need to have a junior level class that covers the Constitution and the legislation and all these things. And I agree with your concerns. I was more comfortable with this because I understand we have some quality standards that address math, English, and history. Am I mistaken in that? And then this in a way would just expand the broad without any specific parameters of what year and what depth and what assessment methods to just add these as topics that should be in the curriculum at some point. Am I mistaken in that perspective that these quality standards do talk about some content areas?
They absolutely do.
They totally do if you've read them.
Yes,
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it just felt like this was getting a little bit too into their curriculum. you shall teach, a specific.
Remember, there's a difference between curriculum and standards.
Right,
Curriculum is, you're giving a standard of one thing. You need to teach the Holocaust is a standard. How to teach the Holocaust is a very different thing.
Fair
That is
enough.
curriculum.
but there
There's
any
nothing
number,
in here about curriculum.
I think, if it's not close, it's.
No,
on
there's
the door.
nothing about curriculum in here. These are standards. These are saying these are the things that an educated Vermonter should know about and understand. How is that different than the educational standard?
I will tell you, I think that most teachers will receive this as somewhat disrespectful in that we're being told to teach about the Holocaust. What is next? And I think that they are probably already doing it. They're touching on it in history and World War II. I mean, it's all part of the same. And why don't teach them about?
So is it okay
other
to say that standards you should teach about World War II? Is that an acceptable standard? Or should you just say, Jeff, history? I mean, honestly,
Yeah, I mean,
just teach
if you
history
teach
for
American
4
history, you
years?
could teach European history, you could teach,
How is saying you have to teach European history? How is that different than saying you need to teach the Holocaust in civic education?
I think this is getting to a level of specificity that's somewhere, I think, crossing the line. And I did speak with teachers about this, and this is how they would say that we're already doing this. We're in our school, we already touch on Holocaust. Are you telling us we're not doing it well enough?
Is it happening everywhere?
I don't know, but I think, well, do I think I should know what they're teaching in every class? I don't think I can do that, but
But generally, these things,
And
civic education, etc.
sure. As for civic education, I agree. Last year it was
Right.
very prescriptive. It's a little bit different. And I think if we're going to get into that, I think we ought to have a richer, fuller this conversation about the standards generally. I'll say that.
Well, tell me then how this interacts with Act One. Were you opposed to that?
No, we supported it and we worked very closely on it. It was
So
But
make
the
the
difference
distinction between, please.
the difference there in the Act One committee was they were to make recommendations to the State Board of Education for that process. This is not that. This is different. This is much more prescriptive. So the Act One group that the chair of the State Board of Education just talked about is coming, I think you said next Tuesday or Wednesday. That was a lengthy process of a subcommittee of the group that then it's coming forward, I guess, next week with a recommendation to the State Board of Education to amend its quality standards.
Yeah, please, Senator Shin.
I share your concerns. I just felt more comfortable with this language. Is there some tweaking to this language that you feel comfortable to have the State Board of Education look at these as to fold into the quality standards in some efficient way? I mean, I just think the Holocaust is that important that we do as a society want to make sure we never repeat such a thing, and incorporating into the curriculum in some broad sense with no specific parameters is something that I could support. How do we get this language to be a place where the NEA doesn't see this as an overreach into the classroom?
Okay, that's a different question, and we can work on that. But if I heard correctly, I was next door. I thought you were at capacity, so I didn't want to come in. But is this being sent for a report? I wrote something about a report. Did I incorrectly hear that? Okay, so I did.
I mean, we were talking about that as a possibility.
Okay.
That Fisher was talking about.
Yeah, so we would support a report of what should be taught in this regard, whether it's European history or something like that. But I think just getting into the specificity here, I think is a bridge too far.
Senator.
Yeah. First of all, I say, I have tremendous respect for you and, the thousands of educators you represent, but I couldn't disagree more, to be quite frank. I mean, first of all, this bill, when I introduced it, had tripartisan support of 15 members of the Senate, which is almost unheard of in my short time here to have so many co-sponsors. So from the most conservative, the most liberal, and everyone in between found value in teaching this very important piece of curriculum. I don't think it's an overreach. I've heard from teachers, candidly on both sides, some have felt that it was, and some have said there are no standards across the board. Some schools are teaching Holocaust, some schools aren't. And then when we heard the data and statistics, that 29% of graduating high school seniors couldn't tell us the name of one concentration camp. 6 to 8% of students believed that the Jewish people started World War II, and et cetera, that motivated me and others to say, listen, we have a problem. And I understand that we don't want to tell educators what to teach at the micro level, but this is so critically important. That's why I'm pleased that it's in here. And it's got to be something that we can all compromise and agree on, because we cannot continue to go down the path of the divisiveness in this country and what we're seeing right now in the world. And you know, in many instances, we're repeating some of the same mistakes that we've made over the last century or two, right? Not specifically us, but you know, you see what's happening in Russia and Ukraine and so on, and this needs to stay.
Certainly.
Yeah, I'm trying to see it through your eyes and through your teacher's eyes, that the concern I'm hearing is that folks who are teaching social studies or history are currently teaching Holocaust education, and they feel that, why are we intruding when it's already happening? But so quality, for me, if you look at this, there's really a potential here for it to expand across other disciplines. So I think of eugenics, I think of the whole history of the way bell curve was developed, and so there's a whole historical sense that's wrapped into this that goes beyond civics education. And having been involved in some cross-cultural educational experiences at the undergraduate and graduate level, this, for me, offers opportunity to think, you know, maybe more globally. So I'm not, you know, I hear what you're saying, and I think the last thing that we would want to do would be to disrespect teachers and the profession of teaching. But at the same time, it is a contemporary issue. January 6th, for me, is just like, it's the beginning of some unseen changes. So that's all. I'm trying to understand if it's already all happening in every school. But maybe it's not. I don't know. And maybe there are opportunities for broader discussion in disciplines other than social studies, civics.
I'm not saying that we shouldn't be discussing the Holocaust. I'm not saying we shouldn't.
No, I get that.
be
But
discussing
as
civics.
a quality standard, you don't think it belongs, or it doesn't belong because it's covered under a different umbrella.
I think it's at a level of specificity that we shouldn't be directing professionals to do in that regard. There are certainly many topics, and I share with you that the Holocaust is one of them, that ought to be covered in a rigorous high school education. That's what we're talking about here. But there are many other issues too that we could all sit around and maybe argue about whether this or that should be in. I think we should let the professionals decide whether it's that issue or some other issues, and how do you squeeze that all into an academic year, and how do you fit that into the whole curriculum year. And so I think what we're saying is, okay, we're going to block off and say to the teacher, you must take a chunk of time to teach specific subjects. And that next year, in our longstanding position has been, it should not be the domain of the legislative body to be telling professional teachers what it is they should be teaching. And that's long held.
So how do the educational standards come about?
I don't know specifically. I mean,
they must have been, I suspect were directed by the legislature. I mean, we don't need to get into that.
Yeah, I don't know.
But Senator Hooker.
Just that I know teachers who have taught the Holocaust, and they've had units on the Holocaust. Some have spent days on it, some have spent weeks on it. And it sounds to me like you're looking at this as a kind of certainly prescriptive way of teaching that sounds like it's leading to a common curriculum across the state. And there are countries that do that. I mean, in other countries, on any given day of the school year, you'll know what's being taught in every school at every level. But what can we do to ensure that the Holocaust and other related issues are brought to the attention of our kids? Certainly there are other issues. I was talking to my colleague this morning about the smallpox blankets and things that where other ethnic groups have been tortured and killed. So how do we bring this to the point where we don't have to worry about kids getting through school without having heard about the Holocaust?
That's a different question, and that's a better question that we should be having, right? I mean, if that's what this is about, and making sure that kids have a not just the Holocaust, but other topics of importance, then maybe the teachers should be getting together and having that conversation. What do we think is the necessary 11th grade or high school?
Center lines.
So what would happen, I'm looking at the wording here, and the Holocaust is the first word. What would happen if this talked about the education of global human rights violations, including the Holocaust?
Human rights, I'm trying to understand that, just that terminology. It is,
We're seeing some now. And then the definition of what is a global human rights violation becomes kind of interesting.
right.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the unit you have, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you ask the kids to work with the teacher to find what they think
Exactly.
a global human rights violation is, and did that happen during the Holocaust? Did it happen in Rwanda? Were there other places around the world and times and places where that was important? And that's probably a better conversation for that teacher to have, and much more meaningful to those students than having the teacher say, okay, now I'm going to take my 2 weeks unit on, I must teach the Holocaust.
I just don't see the harm in, thank you, excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we know that our kids are going to school for reading, math, science, history. This should just be a course called Holocaust and Civics Education, I don't care what you call it. It should just be one additional course depending on graduation from high school. I just don't think that, we're not trying to dictate the entire curriculum from, September through June, what teachers teach, but this is so critically important that there should be some type of standard across the board in Vermont schools that we're not missing the mark in one school versus the other.
And I don't disagree, don't misinterpret what I'm saying. I think the Holocaust is absolutely important.
I totally get that. I think you.
But Jeff, you have to understand, we need you to come, we need a compromise here. We need for you to work with us on this.
Well, I will
issue
work in the
as-
language, that's fair, but
Okay.
as it's drafted, we have concerns.
Okay, I mean, you guys have had concerns about LGBTQ protections this year, public dollars going to religious schools. I mean, we have not seen eye to eye, and we really need to compromise on this one.
Well, I think where we differ on that, we
Well, let's
Yeah.
think about this one in particular. I
Yeah.
think we'd like to see some compromise from you guys on. I really would.
okay, I will,
And I'm hoping that you and Senator Terenzini, since this is something that has been really working on, can come together and bring something back.
sure. We are concerned, I mean, you just, in your example though, we do teach reading, we do teach math, we do teach history. We don't tell teachers specifically in those areas what to teach. And this is instead what we're telling them what to teach. That's the issue.
I understand that, and I'll leave it at this because I know that we're up against a clock here, but we're not here trying to tell a gym teacher to teach basketball over soccer or vice versa. You understand what I mean?
Mhm.
This is as important to me as teaching biology or algebra. It should be one of those courses that it's a no-brainer. You're going to take algebra, you're going to take this, and you're going to take a Holocaust and civics class to complete, your obligation to graduate high school.
I understood. I mean, I worry about this being just one of many. There are many really important topics.
I'll leave it. I'll drop it after this one's instituted. All right. I won't bring any more back. Okay.
I don't worry about you. I worry about the next issue.
So you know where we're trying to go with this?
Yeah.
Can you work this weekend to get us something where, some kind of something?
I'll
that you would
try.
feel-
Yeah, I mean,
that would be great.
I'll try. I'll draft something. I'm not saying it may not. Senator Terenzini's got a particular, concern, and I understand it. I appreciate it.
Well, I think, as we heard with the Act One stuff kind of coming together, this is a way to help sort of direct that as well. I mean, there's something there that I think could work for you guys as well.
Sure.
I'm hoping.
Understood.
And I don't think it's just Senator Terenzini. I think it's Senator Terenzini and 14 of his colleagues. So
I mean, as you know, these times right now, you've got what's happening in Florida. You've got kids, with LGBTQ kids. You've got the attacks, people as Senator Terenzini has illustrated, people not understanding certain historical events like the Holocaust. You have what's happening in Ukraine. You have January 6th. There's a lot going on. And how are we going to have these conversations in the classroom and make sure they're happening as it relates also connecting to some of the other sort of research that's being done out there with Act One, et cetera. There must be some kind of coming together of these things.
Would calling it a world history course, would that?
Well, we have those kinds of things. I think it's really kind of how do we embed this into some of our standards so that it's
Right, I think that's right. Yes.
yeah.
I mean, I think of my kids, they know about the Holocaust, but a lot of their peers may not, and that's okay. For them, it's ancient history, I guess, and they may know more. What I know about my kids is they know things that were about things that I don't fully appreciate either, and I hear things from them about their history that's much more recent and relevant for them. I think they should know about the Holocaust, and they do, and I think all kids should and do, or should. But there are a lot of issues that they should know about. I just worry about us getting too specific in this bill. I'm happy to work with you, Senator, or anybody to try to figure out a way to make sure that we get kids the education that we think they should have leaving high school.
Yeah. Anything else? Okay, so
Last bit on the peer review, I know there's some language, one or two words, I think that we conveyed this morning.
right,
And
which we have.
yes,
Yeah.
no, thank you.
Why don't you, if you don't mind, just go right there. Mr. Fisher, we're just going to stay on this for a minute, and then we're going to go back to Mr. Fannin. You want to say a few words about the any other sections?
Yes, and thank you again for the record, Ted Fisher, Vermont Agency of Education. Appreciate you allowing me to hang out, Mr. Chair. We did get asked yesterday, and I prepared some comments that are reflective of the Secretary's thoughts about section, and I apologize, I said section 5 earlier, it's section 6, which is the peer review support grant program, which is, so generally speaking, the agency is very appreciative of the language as currently written and structured. In terms of executing what seems to be the committee's vision for this policy, the grant program is more implementable by the agency and better from a peer procurement process. As I think Secretary French communicated to you on Wednesday, he's still not sure that peer review is the best way to attack this problem relative to other educator workforce needs and potential strategies for that. He still remains concerned with the funding source and doesn't believe that using the ed fund surplus is appropriate for this purpose. So just wanted to share that, but we are appreciative of the work done to make the program more implementable from our perspective.
Thank you. Anything else from Mr. Fisher? I think we're pretty settled on that language. Mr. Fannin, fingerprinting. We had a conversation yesterday. We're going to shift topics. This is House Bill 729 came to us, or we don't have it, but Senate Judiciary looked at this issue. You know the issue largely that we're talking about, the fee itself.
Yes.
Senate Finance is looking for recommendation on Tuesday or Wednesday of next week. So we need to tell them, does $35 make sense? To me, it strikes me as a pretty steep increase, but I think you have some more background information.
So thank you, Jeff Fannin, again for the record on speaking about H729, specifically the fingerprinting section. I forget the section number, I apologize. We too were concerned about the significant percentage increase in the fee charged to educators, not to be all school employees, to get fingerprinted. And what we learned today, we just got this week and saw the concern, saw the issue, and were made aware of the concern, or excuse me, had concerns about it. We did speak with Mark Anderson, who I believe is the president of the Sheriff's Association. And
Yes,
understand,
we had him yesterday.
yeah, so for example, in his department, they contract with the local schools. The schools then, I guess, pay the sheriff's department for the fee. So this then essentially is an education fund expense that's been borne by the schools for some time. I think that's generally, in the quick review I did with some folks in the field in our office today, that's generally what is believed to be the case mostly around the state, or maybe an outlier here or there, I don't know. But as a general matter, I think most educators go through their employer to get fingerprinted. New educators may not teach, new folks who are just rising out of college, or, who they may not get it paid for by the school. I don't know. But it is a sizable increase, but I do understand from Mr. Anderson that it's important for their systems. And if schools are already paying it in large measure, whatever the fee might be, currently, I don't know what I do believe is happening. There's some mistakes maybe, and I think schools are paying a little bit more than they perhaps should have or could have been. And so the increase ostensibly does not rise, is not as large a percentage. So if you're asking me, I have concerns about it, but it sounds like it's being already incorporated in schools' budgets and being done well. We're not hearing about it. And I think maybe therein lies your answer.
Any concerns with the fee going to $35?
He's happy, I'm happy.
Great, who's happy?
If he's happy.
Well, I'm representing the K-12 group. I know that there are
Other
daycare.
questions with
There are other
daycares?
questions, and I'm not speaking to them because I don't know how they operate. I just don't know. What I'm hearing is my folks are mostly getting it covered by their employer,
Okay.
if not all entirely.
Anything else? Okay, great. Thank you very much.
I also was on the schedule for H727.
Yeah, why don't you just give us 1 minute? You can sit in one of those chairs over there. Since you're on our list. St. James, would you mind joining us for a second? I just have a couple follow-up questions from after. Okay. So I want to go back to it sounds to me, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're really, with the Holocaust, civic education, current issues kind of thing, we're moving in the direction of the educational quality standards. I mean, that's what we're sort of getting at here, right? That's what would be amended, or at least help me out, because we're not asking anybody to put out, hey, this is how we want you to teach. It's very much looking at the quality standards, making certain that certain things are going to be included.
Yes, so Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. So the draft 3.1 that you have in front of you, which we've already talked about, the language was taken from another bill.
Right.
And it kind of created this new school district standard. But the amendment itself was to the statute that addresses education quality standards.
Right.
So everything above that, right, everything that's in that ellipses that you don't see are the education quality standards that the state board has to follow in developing the rules around education quality standards. So within that, 3B is the schools. So it begins by saying, subsection A is, in order to carry out Vermont's policy that all children will be afforded educational opportunities that are substantially equal in quality, each Vermont public school, including each career technical center, shall meet the following education quality standards. And then there's several things. 3B of this section is the school substantially meets standards adopted by the state board regarding conditions, practices, and resources of schools. The standards shall address those aspects of the following that are most closely associated with improving student performance. And then B is instructional practices and curriculum leadership, content, and coordination. And then the state board takes that direction and further in its rules has further detail on what content curriculum content needs to include. So you could leave it up to the state board and just hope that they include that in their content. Or you could amend the educational quality standards and say the content has to include what the Holocaust education, human rights violations, and civics education. But that's as specific as the statute gets as far as curriculum.
And the Act One working group is all, we're planning on taking some of that work and likely altering the educational quality standards. I mean, that's part of that work. Is that accurate?
I'm not familiar with
Okay.
Act One, but enough to say yes.
Yeah.
But we've heard testimony that they will be opening the educational quality standards rules
Right.
related to the work of the Act One group. So it's like a logical.
So, Mr. Fenn, are you opposing that?
No, that's why, no, we're not opposing that. But that was a different, my understanding is it was a recommendation from the Act One group to the State Board of Education.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a process, a lengthy process, a lot of teachers, a lot of involvement from a lot of stakeholder groups. It doesn't seem to be apparent in the current draft here around this bill.
Well, I'm hoping that you and Mr. Terenzini can represent Senator Terenzini, just have some conversation over the next few days, maybe, get to some good spot on this. Okay,
Does that help?
That's
At least to
helpful.
put it in
Yeah.
perspective.
okay. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Okay, H727. Yes, please.
Yeah.
Please. So, you've probably followed our work on this, and I suspect you testified on the House side on this bill.
I think I'm not sure if I did or didn't. I suspect I did. It really, we are, for the record, in Jeff Van, Vermont NEA, here to talk about H727, specifically the transition language upon removal of a school district from a merged entity, if you will.
Yeah.
I'm using a lot of words because, anyway. We worked with the School Board Association, Donna Russo Savage at the Agency of Education, to come up with some language that we thought made sense to protect employees, would give school districts who were withdrawing from an entity the roadmap of how at least it would go, how it would work with their employees or employees, because these folks now would be employed by one entity, one of the spin-off, if you will, and how do we transition that? And so we worked very closely with the SBA, their lawyer, drafting and redrafting, and Donna helping us and guiding us. And the language that we've agreed to, I do believe Ms. St. James now has from Donna Russo Savage. And I think that is what we believe to be the threaded needle, if you will, that everybody can live with, that school districts are protected, employees are protected, and
Right.
nobody's left out in the cold. So that is language that we have.
Ms. St. James, that language,
I have it, but I haven't.
you haven't shared it yet.
I haven't.
Sure, I can
That's
walk
fine.
through it. You haven't, so I could, it really just talks, in large measure, the language sets about a process, a timeline, some key dates for school and the local union, the association, to come to agreement. If they don't, then there's the status quo, the agreement that was in place, if you will, stays until they can ratify something new.
Yeah.
And that's the protected, that's the transition to the status quo remains until such time as they agree otherwise.
Any objections to any of that?
No, is there a page that we're sort of looking at? Do you know that? What?
That's what I was.
We're gonna see the language from Ms. St. James. No, we're not.
I haven't received any kind of feedback on whether or not you wanted to see this language, so
Okay.
I'm not.
So let's just keep with the overview of what you're hoping to do, and then we can,
So the language is 3 pages. I have it, Mrs. St. James has it. The issue is, talks about the operational date, the new board, when they've got to meet with their employee representatives and that process. And again, if there's no agreement, and I don't know if there will or won't be, but nobody's left out in the cold. They know what the rule, there's a fallback. If you can't agree to something by date certain by your operational date, then the existing terms and conditions of employment remain in place until such time as you also, that's the simple concept.
Right. Center lines.
No, my question was timeline, so date certain. So there are periods of time within which decisions have to be made, and if they're not, then.
Yeah, it's not, so prescriptive,
Right.
but it does say, prior to the operational date, you've got to do certain things. So it's, it depends on how it's hard to sort of gauge exactly when they'd be operational. We all suspect July 1,
Right.
but, that's generally the rule. But then, some of this has got to go to the voters, whether they're dissolving. And so there's some room in which the parties can operate on those general dates, if you will.
Well, I was also thinking that within the bill itself, there are places where it could say 30 days after the vote is confirmed, something like that. So that it prevents a prolongation of the agony.
Right. No, we don't want to prolong the agony.
No, we don't.
But there is also under Title 16, and I think it's 2003, the agenda schedule that schools and school boards live under currently. So we didn't want to deviate from that too much either, right? There's an existing timeline process that all the parties typically know about, and why create a separate timeline for a particular set of issues when in large measure they're all pretty similar in time. So we tried to adhere to that concept. I think we all, we threaded the needle for needs of school boards and employees, and ensuring that both sides had something in place and didn't begin without something in place, which we were concerned about. And they were too. I mean, it's not like anybody, this is new a little bit, and we're trying to figure this out, but I think we've done a relatively decent job of saying, okay, we've met the needs of school boards, employees, and here's how we think we ought to go.
Okay.
So we'll look at language next week. You have it. You have something.
Would you like me to send it to editing?
That'd be great.
Right, we go through the definition, and there's definitions in it. It's a, if you don't know, those Donna Russo Savage used to be working with council. She did a nice job guiding us. Applaud her for her efforts.
Great. Okay, so we'll look at language next week on that.
Yes.
And I'm very eager to hear how the Terenzi-Fannin summit goes.
Well, Jeff's gonna come for Easter Sunday dinner, and
What do we have? Because I got lamb at home.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
and a
we're
mango
coming to you.
cheesecake. I heard today, mango cheesecake.
oh,
I don't think I'm not cooking that.
Really?
Thank you all.
Thank you, and thank you for your help with some path forward.
I do know, and I'll just
What is
speak,
that cream stuff you get?
I'm gonna sit down, I'm sure that my friends at Two
I
Prospect will
don't
want
drink much,
to
so I don't know.
weigh in on the curriculum, so I'm gonna, maybe watching, but I'm gonna invite them into the partnership that we have going.
I have some time on Monday if that works for you.
What I would like, if it works best, because I don't want 5 people saying no, 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 and 1 saying yes. So maybe you could represent the group.
Mhm.
And I think that's the best way, personally.
Okay.
That's what I'm most comfortable with.
Okay.
So you could sort of survey.
I'll
talk
get their
to them.
input.
That would be very helpful.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
We are allies, you know.
I know, I agree.
We're just disagreeing on one issue. I love teachers.
They're all great folks, and I think everybody's pulling in the same direction.
We are.
Yeah, we'll get there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. For a great Friday afternoon. Happy Easter. Thank you. Mr. Forlenza,
Yes, sir.
would you like to say a few words about H727?
I
We'd love
would.
to hear some new, I know you've been following this work. We'd love to hear something different, or where you agree or disagree with folks. But we have about 5 minutes.
Okay. So thank you for letting me testify today. I'm Paul Forlenza. I'm on the Lincoln Select Board, and I'm also the Select Board liaison to the Safe Community Schools. This is the group you've heard about, which is leading the effort for Lincoln to withdraw from the Mount A Unified School District. This morning, I provided the committee with the report that we sent to the State Board of Education in anticipation of our April 20th meeting with them. I believe it is comprehensive and will answer many of the questions the State Board has about our asking for approval to withdraw from the district and be reconstituted as the Lincoln School District. I don't expect you to read all 18 pages, but I do invite you to flip through it and look at the table of contents. I believe it is proof that withdrawing towns do not need to be told how to go through the withdrawal process. I think they're very capable, and I trust the voters to decide if they're willing to take this big step for the town. So I think there are about 10 or 12 towns that have discussed withdrawal. They're in various stages. Some of them have not convinced the voters, which I think is proof that they haven't made a convincing argument. And then there are those of us who are in the process. I do think that the State Board and the towns need some guidance. So I'm not suggesting that you do away with this bill. They need some guidance, as do the towns seeking to withdraw. However, requiring withdrawing towns to go through the study committee process almost guarantees that a town with a legitimate reason to withdraw will be discouraged not to do it. It is too hard, too cumbersome. It does not promote involvement by the committee. It's not like withdrawing from a district. Now, this is not on the written testimony I provide, but section 4, some of the issues I have is I don't think you can get the voters to get a petition in to start the process if they don't even know what this thing is about. I mean, we spent an enormous amount of time before the towns voted to have them understand what this process was, what we were trying to accomplish, why we were trying to accomplish it, what the impact on them was, what the impact on our town was, both in terms of educational programming and also in terms of the tax implications. I just think that 724B, probably most of that through small b5, should just be eliminated. I also think it would be difficult to get a letter of commitment from the school board to go through with this. Some school boards are going to be on board. Some of the school boards are not going to be on board with this. In 724 small c7, we did not find that other supervisory unions were interested in talking to us until we, Lincoln, had voted to withdraw, and the other 4 towns in our district had voted to withdraw. My impression is they just thought, well, let's see where this thing goes. How serious are they? How far are they going to be successful? So I'm not in favor of a very prescribed method to go through this, but I do agree that we ought to agree some data to ask the withdrawing towns to put in a report. And I'll provide the list with what I think the data ought to be later this afternoon. In section 6, which is the so-called Lincoln exemption, I suggest it be changed to simply say that this legislation, H727, is not effective for this group of towns for a year after 727 is passed and effective. You may want to do the same thing for section 7, which is the so-called Ripton exception. Started our process 20 months ago in October of 2020. And we figured we still have another 17 months to go until we can be operational as a school district. Our target date is July of next year, 2023. So this is a total of 36 months, and I believe that that is more than enough time to get everybody comfortable with this process. So so what that says to me is we've been through almost all of this process. We voted, the other towns have voted. We need to go on the 20th to get approval to proceed. And there will be some conditions. One of them is that we get an X agreement signed. We've started to work on that. I'm hopeful the board will give us approval to move ahead. And one of the other things I would mention is that the election law and Title 16 do not integrate seamlessly. So we're having a really difficult time being able to schedule everything so that we can get the other towns to sign the X agreement by November 8th, which is the general election date. So we're just going to stop there. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Forlenza at this point? Thank you, Mr. Forlenza, for weighing in. Thank you for your written testimony. I do hope to wrap this bill up at the end of next week. And if we have additional questions, we'll certainly reach out to you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Daphne, would you take us off for a minute?